First of all, let me say congratulations. It's really important. It's really wonderful. We as BIPOC women, especially, need this sort of space. And so, you guys, yeah, my hearts and kudos out to you.
Welcome to Bitch Talk. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm co-host Ange, aka Captain Party.
And for more than 11 years, the show has celebrated underrepresented voices in pop culture and beyond.
But not in the snore kind of way, which is why our listeners and followers have graciously voted us Best of the Bay, Best Podcast on 48 Hills for 3 years in a row. Three-peat, bitches.
If you like what you hear, follow us on Instagram and check out our website, Bitch Talk Podcast, and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're begging you to judge us. When does that ever happen? Oh, you're not going to say anything?
Oh, what'd I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, on with the show. Clink.
Hey, Bitch Talkers, this is our third and final episode coming from Sundance 2025. We have 2 documentary features. One is called Third Act. The other is Heightened, Scrutiny. Very important stories told very differently. And I think Ange and I felt a certain way about both of them.
Yeah, and they both resonate with what we're going through in our lives, both our personal lives and in our world today, unfortunately. But both really important stories that need to be told to help us process what we're going through right now.
And you'll hear this during the Third Act interview. I'm pretty sure Ange found her new mom, or our new therapist, or our new
She gave us a lot of love, which was really nice.
Yeah.
It's always a nice surprise when our interviewees give the love back to us.
Yeah. It helps. So anyways, enjoy this last episode of Sundance 2025, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Okay, Bitch Talk, welcome to Sundance 2025. We are here to talk about a really heartwarming, beautiful documentary. It's called Third Act, and we're sitting down with the director, Tadashi Nakamura, aka Tad, and one of the subjects of the film, also Tad's mother, Karen Ishizuka. Welcome to Bitch Talk.
Thanks for having us.
So we'll go ahead and start with you, Tad. Can you introduce our audience to Third Act?
Yeah, Third Act is a father and son story about me and my dad, Robert A. Nakamura, who's commonly known as the godfather of Asian American media for his pioneering work as a photographer and filmmaker, as well as a founder of multiple Asian American arts organizations. The film is, about his career, his life, his history as a child incarcerated in a World War II concentration camp, Japanese American concentration camp, as well as our relationship as a filmmaking team, and also his current struggle with Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, this film hit on so many levels for me. I'm not going to get into it too much because I'll probably start crying. And I wanted to know, it seemed like throughout your life, Tad, and with Karen, there were a lot of open conversations about the past in the history. But I do want to talk about your conversation about once the camera started rolling, you did say your dad did open up more. Can you talk about how that went and how you were behind the camera, and Karen, also for you to witness this?
Yeah, I think, like most, Asian men of my dad's generation, or maybe, a lot of fathers in general, aren't very good with directly expressing their emotions, especially to their kids, or in our context, father to the son. So I think, as much as my dad very much shows his love in other ways, we don't have those, we're not the type of father and son to sit me down and, hey son, I love you, I'm so proud of everything you do. It just feels a little uncomfortable. And so I think having the excuse of making this film one gave us time and space to have these conversations. But I think him being a filmmaker himself, he knows the vulnerability and the depth a character needs to make a film good. And I think because of that, and mainly because he wanted to help me and he would do anything for me, he wanted to make this film as good as possible for my career. And therefore, he knew he would have to push himself. So I think initially that kind of got us to push ourselves. And even for me, sitting down, I was at first sitting down as a director, trying to ask these harder questions, dig deeper. Because as a son, I probably would never do that. But I think once we kind of got in a groove, I think we both realized how the camera kind of created this buffer of, and what would usually be uncomfortable actually became a lot more comfortable. Both of us being filmmakers, both of us used to having a camera around. So in a way, it kind of created this really special space and time for us to actually communicate very directly about how we feel about each other.
Yeah. First of all, let me say congratulations. I hear this is like your 11th year in podcast. It's
Actually, we're going on 12, Karen.
Yeah,
okay.
2025 is the 12th.
We are the Golden Girls.
Really, you're
Yeah.
older than you look. But it's terrific. It's really important. It's really wonderful. We as BIPOC women, especially, need this sort of space. And so, you guys, yeah, my hearts and kudos out to you. Terrific.
Oh, Karen. Queen recognized queen. That's all I'm
Yes.
saying.
Yeah. So yeah, I realize this has been a really special project. I have collaborated with Bob on many, many films, and Bob and I have collaborated with Tad on his films as well. So it was really, what I think it started out more sort of as a passion project on Tad's part of wanting to pay tribute to Bob, but I think it got to be so much more. Um, and there's so many things. Tad mentioned that not the kind of family that speaks so openly, but I think just a lot of API families just that's not how we roll. It's just in so many other ways, and I think that we're so used to being in this sort of majority dominant world, how that it's usual to say things or be open, but I think that things like this are so important and yet so hard, not just for us, but for people, I think in general. So I think once we found out that Bob had Parkinson's, and that diagnosis came actually probably a year or so into Ted's making the film. So, we knew something was wrong for a long time, but we didn't know what. So, it's been just really interesting because I think Bob, being a filmmaker himself, um, looked at this very differently than if he was just a subject of a documentary film of someone who has Parkinson's or who had been through the concentration camps. I think that that's where all the layers really started coming in, is that, like Tad said, he was really willing to be very vulnerable and open, with Tad for the process. And because he's a filmmaker and he knows what a good subject would be like, he was wearing these two hats, I think, all the time. So I think that's just another interesting aspect, of the film.
Yeah, it's definitely a gut punch moment as a viewer when the diagnosis hits and the film completely shifts. But I think it's really important, Tad, that we watch your struggle with also wearing two hats. You're this filmmaker and you really want to capture and do honor for your dad's life, but you're also a son and you want to be present, really fully present with him. So can you talk about sort of towing the line between these two things that are equally of value? And also, Karen, as someone with production experience, did you see Tad struggling with this and have any advice for him along the way as you're dealing with your grief too?
Yeah, I think my relationship with the film kind of evolved multiple times. The initial inspiration for the film was a film my dad did on his dad, so my Ji-chan, my grandpa, and so there's a lot of full circle parallels. So my dad was actually my age when he made that film on his dad, and that film really gave me a glimpse of my own Ji-chan that I never knew, as a younger man. So I think at first the initial inspiration was that film Watari Dori, and kind of wanting to create and document my dad so my kids and his other grandkids could have a glimpse of who he was before they knew him just as Bob or as a grandfather. But I think when the diagnosis hit emotionally, I think I actually used the film as an escape. Um, Instead of kind of dealing with it in reality, I kind of focused on it more, as almost saw him as a character and saw myself as a character struggling with this disease and navigating these relationships, but almost from a third person perspective. It was just easier for me to detach. Um, but once we actually kind of dove in, and the conversations that I talked about earlier, I think that actually created a space for us to really process what was happening in real time through the film. So I think these interview sessions kind of became almost therapy sessions for both of us. And at that point, I kind of realized how special it was. At that same time, a lot of my friends were losing their fathers or parents. And, they kept on telling me, just spend as much time with him as possible. Ask him all the questions you've ever wanted to ask, because a lot of us never had that chance with our fathers or our parents. And at the same time, I think with the diagnosis, because it's an incurable disease, I think it really hit my dad's himself of his own mortality. And so I think for him, it gave him a chance to kind of tell me everything he's always wanted to tell me, to prepare me to navigate this not only racist world, but also just advice as a filmmaker and as a father. Then I kind of found myself in a way holding on to this process, and in a way I felt that if I could, the longer I could hold on and continue making this film, the longer I could hold on to my kind of unique working relationship with my dad. So part of me felt that if this film never ends, maybe my working relationship with my dad will never end. Um, but then, of course, my dad's like, "We got to get this film done." So always the director giving me instructions. He kind of told me to wrap it up. But honestly, it really wasn't. I don't think that I would have been able to get to that point if I didn't bring on editor Victoria Chalk and the whole team. They're the ones that really, I was too close to the material to actually turn it into a 90-minute film, and it was a really I was just lucky to have such a great team to help me do that and create that separation.
Yeah, I could see the struggles that Tad was having throughout this. And I could see how, I mean, it takes a long time to make a film. And I get it. I've done that. But, you have to have a deadline. You have to finish it up. But I could see him, and I'd ask him, well, how's it going? When is it going to be done? Oh, it's going, I don't know. So, I could see him sort of hesitating too. Um, so, that really spoke though to what Tad said, is that it, their relationship grew as the film went on as well. Everybody goes through something, Erin, you were saying that you didn't want to get too much in because you could, get too much in. So, everybody, is going through something, but we don't talk about it as much. We don't share our experiences with each other. And I'm at an age where, I'm experiencing so many of my friends going. And then, death in life has no age limit. So, I see Tad too, and as um, that he's lost a lot of friends, and I'm sure you guys have too. So it's something that, each of us is going through and pretty much alone, I think. So, that's kind of my hope for this film is that, it just sort of opens up conversations, whatever those might be, so that people can feel less alone.
Hmm. Karen, we got to talk after this. We have to wrap soon-ish, but I do want to talk about Prince because come on, that kid is something. First of all,
force to be reckoned with.
Did I miss something? Is he named after Prince? And then second, I want to know because if he is, I mean, come on, Tad. And then second, I want to know as he gets older, what do you want him to take away from this film?
Yeah, so the first question, Prince is what I wanted to name him after my favorite musician, after everyone's favorite musician. But his official real name is Paolo. But I think everyone on my side of the family calls him Prince. Everyone on my partner's side calls him Pau Pau because they're Filipino and they always have to have 5 nicknames, right?
Ask Ange, yeah.
Yeah. And typically like the same word twice, Pow Pow, boy, boy, whatever. Yeah.
But yeah, I think Prince, I think in the film he provides that, he's the character of the future of some potential hope, as well as comic relief. But I think really his role too. So again, another parallel is that when my dad was sent to Manzanar during World War II, he was the same age as my son is now. And so I think it really, my dad has, he calls it an ambivalence towards camp because, he was, of course, it's this place that destroyed his life and his family and the community. But at the same time, all his childhood memories, anything nostalgic takes place in camp, as well as, during the 70s and late 60s, during the Asian American movement, Manzanar was a place of empowerment, especially on that first pilgrimage. So I think my son, I think provides that ambivalence. And, it's funny because filmmaking is such a family business for our family. And I do think, after watching the final cut, I'm like, oh, I am putting a little bit of pressure on him to become a filmmaker, as well as maybe to get into UCLA as well. But I think he can handle it. I mean, I don't want to put any pressure on him, but I do want him to know, as well as my daughter Malaya and my niece and nephew Mina and Gus, that we come from a big, powerful line and lineage of artists and community folks that have a lot to say and have a lot of responsibility to serve in community. And so whether it's filmmaking or something else, I really think that I want him to know that he has a responsibility to his family and has a responsibility to his community first and foremost, and he could fulfill that any which way he wants, but as long as he understands that, that's the one thing I'll put pressure on him to do.
I love that. And those scenes, returning to Manzanar with your dad and your son, watching those, I was like, this is how we tackle generational trauma, is you face it, you talk about it, You put it out in the open, which is, we've all agreed, that's not how we that's not how we grew up. That's not how our parents were. But it's just really refreshing to see those scenes. And it really gives me hope in the future. Like, Prince is the future. Hopefully, you know, Prince for president 2040, maybe. We'll see.
I'll vote for him.
Yeah, but we do have to wrap, but I can't get off this interview without mentioning my favorite location in the film, which is the original Tommy Burgers. My dad grew up at the one right down the street from Beverly and Rampart, the first ever Tommy's. And that place is my favorite. I'm craving it now, and I'm living in the Bay, so I can't have it. So thanks for that. But the original Tommy's is the best chili burger ever. We have to give a shout out. And I want to take Erin there, but I'm afraid she's not going to love it as much as I do, because it just tastes like my childhood, right? What are your thoughts, Sad? And
Yeah,
Karen?
no, I think Tommy's same thing is, my dad made, those are those life lessons of like, this is the best chili cheeseburger, this is the best local moco. But I think that what our friends and I are talking about, a good drinking game when this film is screened, is to take a shot whenever you see food being eaten or talked about. I think that's something, again, it was not planned at all, but if anyone knows my dad, as much of a filmmaker he is, his favorite things to talk about are food and gambling. So I'm glad we got
my
we
dad too. I mean, wow.
We didn't get the gambling in, but at least we got the food element of his personality. So
I loved it so much. What a special film. The audience is in for a treat. Anyone that watches this film, it hits right to the heart. Thank you so much for sharing such intimate details about your family. And I hope we can connect on future projects, and excited to see where this film goes.
Oh, thank you so much. No, really, really appreciate having us on here.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, Erin. This has been wonderful. Keep up the good work.
All right, Bitch Talkers, we are at Sundance 2025. Very excited to be speaking with the director of the documentary Heightened, Scrutiny. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and also introduce the film.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. I'm really glad to be here. I'm big fans of the podcast. My name is Sam Fader, and I just premiered my most current film called Heightened Scrutiny. And the film follows Chase Strangio, ACLU lawyer, preparing for the landmark historic Supreme Court case defending trans young people's access to puberty blockers and hormones. And Chase is the first out trans lawyer to argue at the Supreme Court. So this moment is historical on many levels. And in the film, while we follow him and we show the context within which mainstream media has impacted the criminalization of trans bodies, there's a direct connection leading to the surge of anti-trans laws.
Yeah, that I think one of the most startling facts in the documentary for me was that just within a 3-year time span from 2021 to 2024, we went from 0 states to 23 that now have banned gender affirming care for transgender adolescents, which is insane. In 3 years, like, why does the government only move fast when it's being oppressive, right? Like, nothing happens in 3 years. So that was extremely frightening. And Utah, which is where Sundance is being held, was at the helm of that. They started, I think it was the first transgender bathroom ban, if I'm not mistaken, but one of the first ones. So can you talk about just the importance of you being in Utah with this film in this moment?
Yeah, the laws in Utah are always, all these laws are confusing. I think at this point, trans students don't have access to the bathroom. Trans students don't have any protections in schools. I think right now that's where the focus is, which heartbreakingly, the focus is all on young people right now. And the film has a young person named Mila, and we were with her throughout the film, and we see this budding activist, this brilliant, confident, charming child. She's not a child, she's 13, but she's a young person, and we follow her and see her standing up to these adults who are just refusing to acknowledge their responsibility in perpetuating transphobia in the school systems of New York City. And then we're at home with her and her family, and we see the context in which this family loves each other. And then we see her speak outside of the Supreme Court the day that Chase is arguing the case. And that thread is just one of the most important to me, right? To give young people a voice in a conversation that has been all about them, but have eliminated their voices entirely. Um, and it was a question for me of how to do that. I want to give young people a voice, but there's a lot of ethical concerns with documenting young people. But meeting Mila made it completely possible.
Yeah, Mila is courageous as fuck. I was crying with her, cheering with her and her family and her brother. It's so special that you got her in the doc. But I do want to rewind just a little bit. How did you and Chase become friends? I'm going to assume you're friends. And how did this all evolve?
So I originally met Chase in 2019 when I was just about finishing up my last film called Disclosure, which also premiered at Sundance 5 years ago, actually the exact same day of premiere, January 27th, which was very strange. And almost to the exact same time. So I met him October, I think it was October 2019. We were at a pitch forum called Doc Pitch USA, and they curate, a table of people to kind of speak on behalf of your film and try to get you funded. And Chase just was incredible on that panel, and we were able to close our production gap. And Chase and I, were talking about Disclosure and what it was about at the time, and he was really able to articulate the fears that I was having. Like the whole reason I made Disclosure was because I felt so concerned about the rise of visibility that it was going to go hand in hand with the rise of legislative and social backlash, violence. And he was really able to ground that in the film. At the end, there's just, a few bites of him, but I really wasn't able to get there previously. And so that's how we initially met, and we stayed in touch during, while he was preparing for the Bostock case. And I really learned from him how important, these media narratives are regarding these Supreme Court cases, because the judges are not immune, right, to what the public discourse is. And, he thinks of himself as a storyteller. That's what he does in court. He's creating stories, right? He's taking people on this journey with him to understand conditions and how they do or don't need to change. And so when I started this film initially, it was really about the trying to critique and hold the mainstream media accountable to how they've impacted all these anti-trans laws. And that's where you see all those interviews. That's when I started those interviews. But then when it was announced the end of June that Chase was going to be going to SCOTUS, I immediately knew I wanted to follow that and document that and create a historical record of that moment for him. And so, we texted about it a little bit, and what he likes to say is the thing that convinced him most that he wanted to do this was that part of my reasoning for wanting to document him was to show the younger generation that we tried. Like we tried all the way to the Supreme Court. And we just had a screening this afternoon. And after the screening, a young queer 20, 21 years old, raised their hand to ask a question, and they were sobbing, and they were just like, things seem so good for a minute for my generation, and what are we supposed to do now? And it was really heartbreaking, and of course we don't have an answer to that. And so continues to feel important to me that they know that there is still room to fight, and there is still fight in all of us.
Oh, thank you for sharing that story. I can only imagine how it felt being in that room.
Sad.
So obviously we see Chase going through a lot of pressure, a lot of rehearsal, a lot of practice. But one thing I'm really glad that you show is he took the time to go on a little trip for himself as well. He goes to Italy. That is so important to show that, yes, we need to work hard and we need to fight, but also we're human and we need balance. So I wanted to know, did you also agree to direct this film because of the trip? Because you got to go to Italy, Sam. Let's be honest.
I love the rumor that I went on that trip with him, but I did not.
Oh, come on. I was really hoping for you.
No, I really wish I had, but no. It was during that trip when he was with some friends, and I knew he'd be preparing, and I was like, can you please capture him preparing? And that's when we started to integrate the iPhone footage that you see starting at that trip.
Okay. Well, I still believe in taking little breaks and
Yes,
hitting the refresh button. So
it's not a bad idea for my next film. Like I might put that, in the budget that
yeah,
I
exactly.
travel to Italy, to Sicily, precisely with the
Specifically.
protagonist. I like that.
Sam, I know there's a lot of challenges with this film, but there's also a lot of highlights. But can you talk about either personally or professionally some of those challenges and or highlights working on this film?
Well, I mean, certainly the timeline was really, really challenging. We didn't start filming the Chase storyline until July, right? So July, August, September, October, November, December. 6 months later, we're getting ready to premiere it, and then 7 months later, we are here. That was rough, real, real, real rough. But I felt like I had no choice because I wanted the film to be part of the conversation while the judges are deliberating the case. So there was never a question in my mind that we were going to have to finish it. Yeah, I was worried that we wouldn't have an audience though, because we had to finish it so quickly. So to be able to premiere at Sundance was just such I was just so grateful on a different level than I have been before, right? Like this was more just like an exhale, like, okay, we'll have an audience and there people will start talking about this case, which very few people know about. Like the impact, I've never like so thoroughly been committed to the impact of a project before more than anything else. So that was wonderful. Another highlight obviously was meeting Mila, and just imagining what that must be like to be that age and that confident and that seen and held and known to herself. Because, we all trans people, queer people, every marginalized person has so much internalized phobias against themselves and unknowns and imposter syndrome and all these things that make it so hard to feel grounded, in the world. And she just embodies this life, without missing a beat. And that was really like a wonderful part of making this film for sure.
I also have to give a shout out to Mila's mother,
Oh my
who,
God.
I mean, all of us, I don't know anyone who can say, like, my mom or my dad gets me 100% and supports me 100%. It's just not a thing that happens. And for her mom to just be by her side and right along with her it's so beautiful to see. And I like, on the concept of that, I like the idea of this film even existing is already a win, regardless of what the outcome of the court case. This is one of many, right? This is, you say that in the film, it's not over after you get the results. It's just going to be a lifelong fight. But just the fact that this film exists in this moment in time, Mila exists, you exist, that's already a win. It's already progress.
That's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
Sam, before we close, I do want to ask, I'm sure, like you just said, during the filming and probably editing process, there are ideas of the takeaways for audiences and for people. And now we're in a different place and time. So I guess to that point, what do you want audiences right in this moment to take away from this film? And what are you saying at the Sundance screenings?
I thank you for asking that. And a lot of that, there's so many things I want people to take away. But as you were saying that, I kind of was revisiting that last question about highlights. And one of the highlights was listening to the argument. So December 4th was when Chase argued the case. And on the Amtrak home that same day, we're all taking the train back together. I was listening to the argument because I couldn't listen while we were filming it. And I started seeing how, like, oh my God, this is exactly what we've been saying. The exact things that were in the media, the things that Chase is preparing are the questions the judges were asking. And that's when we decided to bring in the audio of the case. And I'm very excited about the idea of people realizing they can listen to the arguments. These are all online, they're live, and they're all up there forever. And so that was a highlight, but I know that wasn't your most recent question. What I want people to take away, first and foremost, I want them to know this case is happening, that there's 9 people, in Washington who are going to decide whether a population of marginalized people have access to the healthcare they need. I mean, it's just, it's such a strange concept. And it's happening in real time. And I want people to know about it. And I want them to talk about it. And I want the the sort of the allies that we kind of lost over the last few years, who've been sort of going down this path with the mainstream media to say, well, I mean, I like trans people, but maybe this isn't safe, and maybe kids don't know. Like, people who are having those sort of questions, I want them to realize that you're talking about a life. You're talking about an identity. You're not talking about an ideology, right? Because once you make it an ideology, then it's up for debate. Like, that's what we do in public. But you don't debate an identity, like someone's living existence. And I want them to kind of look back at the media that they've consumed and question why they believed it. Like, what are they internalizing that just a few years ago they were celebrating our visibility because we were in Hollywood, but now they're wondering whether we should have access to healthcare. So I do want that population. I feel like a lot of our allies, we've lost, and I want them back. And that's my work is focused on coalition building, right? I'm not trying to convince skeptics. I'm not trying to get the right wing. I want the folks that are invested in bodily autonomy, reproductive justice, trans rights. I want us all to be together. And I feel like the right has really succeeded in dividing us. And so those are the two things I really want people to take away the most, is to understand that this case is going to affect the constitutional rights of all Americans, and to understand the role that mainstream media has played in impacting anti-trans legislation.
Okay, last quick question. What news do you read then?
Say that again?
What news sites are you reading? Because I was like, oh, okay, goodbye, New York Times, email. Like, goodbye. Like, that was my little,
It's all of them. Yeah, it's true.
I think that's a really good question. And this is my job, right? My job is to, in 90 minutes, create the context for things that people don't have the time to do, right? Not everyone has the time to read 5 different outlets and come to their own conclusions. So we just don't have the time for that. But I do hope people can have a little more of a critical eye, just have a critical awareness. I'm not going to tell you what to read and who to believe. Just have questions. Just question it. Who wrote this? Why did they write it? Why is the headline that way? What is the headline trying to tell me? Whose voices are being prioritized? Is this a fair, both sides-ism? Is there really 2 sides to someone's right to live? That's what I want. I just want people to be a little more critical of the press they're taking in. But I do love Democracy Now!
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry. We do too. That's a nice little plug. Thank you for your time, Sam. This is a wonderful doc. I hope it gets picked up like that and it's out, by February. The film is Heightened, Scrutiny. You're at Sundance 2025. Thank you for fitting us in. We really appreciate your work.
It's such an honor to be in conversation with you both. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. You can find more information about this episode in our show notes.
If you're missing us, you can visit us at bitchtalkpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and buy us a cup of coffee.
Did you know we're also on the radio? You can find us at bff.fm.
And lastly, rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All the cool bitches are doing it.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.fm podcast network. Learn more at podcasts.bff.fm.
BFF.fm, best frequencies forever.